All right, Alexander, let's talk about what is happening in Germany. And we've actually covered the political scene in Germany for many, many years. And we've covered the rise of AfD over those years. And it's risen, it's stalled, it's risen, it's stalled. It's kind of been a bit of an up and down journey with AfD, the alternative party to the major parties in Germany. But now it looks like we have a resurgence once again in the AfD. I believe they're polling at somewhere between 17 to 19%, somewhere around there, which would make them, I believe, the second biggest political party in Germany, or definitely one of the biggest political parties in Germany. But to be quite honest, I don't know much about their leadership. I don't even know who their leader is. They don't seem to have the exposure of their leadership as as well done as say the CDU or the SPD.
Yes.
It seems like while they're a big party now, there's really not much that people on the outside of Germany know about them. So what's going on with the AfD? Why are they rising? Why are the other parties stagnant or falling? And what can the AfD do to continue to rise and maybe even perhaps govern one day? What was once thought of as impossible may actually happen. Who knows?
Yes. Well, let's first of all just look at an opinion poll which I've just seen, which is a current one, and it puts the CDU-CSU. This is Germany's dominant conservative right of centre party at 27%, which is low, by the way. I mean, when Angela Merkel was leading the CDU-CSU, especially in the early days, it used to poll sometimes around 40%, 40+%. So 27% is quite a fall. Then joint second at 19% are the SPD and the AfD. So that puts the AfD joint second with the SPD. Now, the SPD was the other big party, political group in Germany. In fact, it's Germany's oldest party. It goes all the way back to the 19th century. It was once, by the way, banned by Bismarck. So that gives you an idea about how long it's existed. So, this was also a political movement which in its heyday was regularly polling well over 40%. It's now down to 19%, and it's now equal with the AfD. The Greens, who at the time of the election, a couple of years ago, which resulted in the formation of the current coalition, were polling at times well above 20%, and who eventually got around 20% of the vote. Well, they've collapsed to 13%. They are now starting to fall. And then there's other parties, the Liberal Party, the FDP at 9%. Die Linke are at 5%. That's the left-wing party, which at one point was also apparently doing quite well. And that, by the way, is a rise for them. They'd basically collapsed below the 5% threshold, but they seem to be undergoing a small rise. Now, the point is that the parties that are rising are the parties that are outside the establishment. The AfD, and to a small extent, Die Linke. And one of the great problems, and you've identified it exactly, is that both the AfD and Die Linke are extremely unhappy coalitions. So you have people within the AfD who are, traditional conservatives, Eurosceptical, believe, in family values, the kind of things that conservatives used to do, mainstream, but they're skeptical about Europe. They want good relations with Russia. The alternative for Germany that they represented was an alternative outside the Euro system. They don't want to be part of the Euro. They want to keep Germany to have its own currency. They want a more sovereigntist foreign policy. So they're traditional conservatives. There are other people who are to the right of that, who have a stronger emphasis on immigration, though some of the conservatives I've just discussed also would have strong positions on immigration. And there are also people well to the right of the more right-wing groups, and some of whom, I'm afraid, do shade into some, pretty strong right-wing positions, which I personally wouldn't countenance. So you have this coalition of people, and the result is that they've never really coalesced with a single consolidated leadership. And this movement, part of the reason why it has ebbed and flowed in the way that you say, is precisely because it's riven with disputes, arguments, quarrels between the various members, and it's never quite clear if you vote for the AfD in any particular place, who exactly you are voting for. Are you voting for a traditional conservative party? Are you voting for something well to the right of that? I mean, you might be attracted to either position, but you might not be getting exactly what you want. So it's never really managed to gain critical mass until now. And you ask about who might lead it into an election. Within the AfD, I also get the sense that there are some extremely strong and forceful personalities, people who could actually lead Germany, who could provide Germany with a political alternative, who you could imagine forming a successful government in Germany. Now, Alice Weidel is the person I know. I'm not saying she's the leader of the AfD. I'm not sure that the AfD, you can say that any particular person is a leader. But internationally, she seems to me to have the highest profile. And I think she would probably be a likely chancellor option if the AfD were to achieve that kind of electoral breakthrough where it might be called upon to form a government. We're very far from that position, yet it might be said. I mean, I have seen Bundestag debates in which Alice Weidel, for example, got the better of Angela Merkel. So she is certainly someone to take very seriously. Now, I'm not going to waste time with Die Linke because that's still a very small party, but it's got the same problems. It too has been divided between various wings. There's a much more hardline wing, which is East German based, drawn from the former East German Communist Party. Basically, they're the guardians of East Germany's flame, if you like, its heritage. There's a more traditional a more different kind of left wing. And there's also splits with some parts of Die Linke gradually falling for the identity politics thing, which distances it from its working class roots. So these two anti-establishment parties have their problems, but they do seem to be rising. And in fact, they're not just rising. The AfD is currently surging. Now, why is this happening? Now, I'm going to say this. In some ways, it ought to have happened a long time ago, because the policy that the current German government is following, which is largely supported by the opposition CDU, CSU, is one which is completely contrary to German national interests. We've discussed this many times. They have supported sanctions, the sanctions war against Russia. They've completely supported Ukraine. They are arming Ukraine. They're sending German tanks to Ukraine. They're constantly crossing their own red lines. They're sitting on their hands as Nord Stream is blown up and not really pointing any fingers at who was most likely responsible. The result is Germany is in recession. There's been a long period of inflation. There are now clear signs of a process of deindustrialization in Germany beginning to set in. And yet, despite all of this happening, for about a year after the Ukrainian war started, you saw the political the opinion polls seemingly set in concrete. The Greens were rising, the most fierce advocates of all of these policies. I should say Germany also has very radical energy and climate, green energy policies, which also don't fit very well with its manufacturing and heavy industry base. So nonetheless, the Greens were rising, the coalition was unstable, but nonetheless it held together. The CDU, CSU was strong. What has happened over the last month or so is that has suddenly changed. It's as if the German public has finally had enough. They see this thing going on forever into the indefinite future. They no longer believe the narrative that has been sold to them, and they're starting to turn on the establishment parties, the CDU, the SPD, principally the Greens, who've suffered, a significant loss of support, and they're looking for alternatives, and they're finding them in the AfD. So that's what's happened, and we'll see whether this becomes an established trend. It's certainly spooked the German political establishment because they sense that there is an anti-establishment, mood starting to build in Germany. It's as if finally the ice in which German politics has been frozen has broken.
The German establishment, they've tried to shut down AfD in the past. And I believe Die Linke as well. Are they going to do that again? Or will they just maybe, will some establishment party decide that maybe they can perhaps govern with AfD or even Die Linke? It sounds impossible given how they've branded, especially AfD, but shutting them down, or perhaps will they finally realize that this is a political reality now and maybe we have to find a way to work with them if we want to govern?
I don't think that they're prepared to do that for the moment. I think that every part of the German political establishment, the establishment parties, they do not want to have anything to do either with the AfD or even with Die Linke. I mean, the SPD perhaps one day might agree to come to some kind of an arrangement with Die Linke. It's just marginally more acceptable to the establishment than the AfD is. But I have to say that I am sceptical that that will happen anytime soon. I think much more likely what we're going to see is a full frontal attack on the AfD, that they're Putinists, that the F word, we know what I'm referring to, will be used liberally as it always is. We're going to see campaigns like that. There are going to be arguments that they should be banned because supposedly they violate the various provisions in the German constitution. We're going to see lots of this sort of thing. I think that is what we are more likely to see at the moment. But the AfD has survived all of that, and it is surging. This is nothing new. German voters have heard all this already about the AfD, and nonetheless, they're now turning to it in increasing numbers. So it is not impossible that such an attack on the AfD could backlash. Now, that leaves problems because the coalition itself is under extreme tensions. Now, the Greens not only are becoming more unpopular, but they're becoming unpopular because they've set the pace within the coalition. There's been a scandal, a nepotism scandal, involving, well, not a nepotism scandal, but a connection scandal involving their leader, their effective leader, Robert Habeck, who's the vice chancellor. He employed somebody in his office, failing to disclose a conflict of interest. He had eventually sacked this person. It was very, very embarrassing. He's also been pushing relentlessly for rules which will prevent people having conventional boilers in new room houses. And I have to say, there's been a huge amount said about this in Germany, but my own feeling is that this issue this topic. I don't want to underline its importance, but I think it's just crystallized doubts about the Greens, which was starting to grow in Germany anyway. And again, not before time, some might think. So the Greens are on very bad terms now with parts of the coalition. They and the FDP, the Liberal Party, which is another party which makes up the coalition, are basically in a state of semi-open war with each other. So the coalition is looking very unstable, but very difficult to establish an alternative to this this existing coalition within the new German parliament, because if the CDU-CSU, for example, goes into coalition, tries to set up a coalition with the alternative parties, with the SPD going into opposition, well, the problems would reproduce themselves because the Greens and the Liberals would still be in enmity with each other. The CDU-CSU, the SPD, and one of the two smaller parties could form a grand coalition, conceivably. It's happened many times in Germany. Merkel did that very often. But again, I think that would be unpopular with many people, and it would leave the road open to the AfD. The most logical thing to happen in Germany, the way to break the deadlock, would be to call an election. But of course, nobody wants an election. The German establishment doesn't want an election when the AfD is surging. So you see that there is a problem, that there are growing problems politically within Germany. And I suspect, as I said, that ultimately what they will try over the next few months is that they will try to unite every part of the establishment in some kind of a big attack on the AfD, but one that could backlash on them. What I will say is, if you look at German reports at the moment, they are spooked by the rise of the AfD. The one thing they do not want is people in Germany doing what the AfD is doing, which is offer alternative policies, which might be attractive to many voters. And you can certainly see how, with the AfD growing in strength on the right, it could start to take away votes from the CDU, CSU, because a lot of CDU people probably instinctively sympathise with the traditional conservatives within the AfD. And I could personally even see a situation where a lot of those people on the left who have been voting for the Greens up to now, starting to become disillusioned with the Greens, start to migrate to Die Linke. It has happened before, it could happen again.
Is the AfD truly an anti-war party? I mean, do you think they're the real deal? Because we have parties like the Brothers in Italy who position themselves, who are a conservative, say, right, traditional party, but when they came to power, they've been more hawkish than the Greens at time in Germany. So I mean, Meloni hasn't exactly been a real traditional conservative and then looking after Italian interests. She seems to express that, but her party has been very hawkish. So I'm just curious if the AfD is really truly going to look after Germany's interests, or are they, if they were eventually to get into some sort of government?
That is an excellent question,
just
and I don't have
like the Brothers Italy. Yeah.
Yes, and that is an excellent question. I don't have a simple answer to it because, as I said, I think the trouble is that the AfD itself is, as I said, this agglomeration of different people, and it could very well be that eventually, sometime, someone amongst them might decide, well, let's take a more old-fashioned, if you like, Atlanticist position, because after all, that is what German conservatives used to do for most of the period of the Cold War. So it's possible. I would say that if they did that, they would be undermining their long-term position, because that is ultimately, it's because they're taking a sovereigntist position that people are increasingly voting for them. But I think the only answer to that is if they ever do succeed in repeating the success of the brothers in Italy and do eventually come to power. We will only really know then. I mean, Meloni kept her positions on the war very quiet until she was elected. Then, as you correctly said, she became a very strong hawkish Atlanticist. She's still winning, by the way, on the momentum of her victory. And what you're seeing across Italy, by the way, I mean, they had local elections recently, is a total collapse of the Italian left, which is astonishing. I mean, you know, we were talking recently in one of our programs about the collapse of the left in Greece, the collapse of the left in Italy, which, you know, was a huge force in Italian life. If you went back in time to 1980, I mean, the Italian Communist Party of that time, the PCI, was a huge political force all across Italy. And of course, there was the Red Belt in central Italy, places like Bologna, which were solidly communist, and where, you know, you go to villages where people were solidly communist. Well, that's collapsing. Now, that has given Meloni some freedom for manoeuvre, despite the fact that one senses that much of her electorate is sceptical. I don't know whether in Germany the AfD would do the kind of switch that Meloni has done once they come into power. As I said, I think they might be able to. Unless there are anti-war parties, perhaps on the left, as strong as they, which are able to attract votes, then I think the temptations to do the Meloni switch might be there. But, you know, only time can tell. And with the Die Linke, at least, looking, to be frank, a pretty fractured party, it might be that anti-war position on the left isn't to be found there either. So, you know, I can't tell you for a definite fact that if the AfD breaks through, it will change policies, because I don't know. What I will say is this: if it does break through, whether it changes those policies or not, it would still be an earthquake in Germany. In terms of German politics, it would mean that you're living in a completely different country, because it would mean the German voters have finally broken with the mainstream, which has dominated German politics since the end of the Second World War. They're starting to hunt for sovereigntist alternatives, even if those sovereigntist alternatives aren't delivering. And that would be a fundamental change in the mindset of the German electorate. It would mean that it would be acceptable to be a sovereigntist in Germany again, to actually vote for a party that says Germany first and we want to follow German national interests. For much of the post-war period, a party that openly talked in that way, because of the past, would find it very, very difficult indeed to win a critical mass of German voters to support it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we will leave it there at theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, Rockfin, and Telegram. And go to Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.